do you think the impact of this specific incident regarding Samsung mean for the overall brand of a smartphone and possibly the credibility of this huge conglomerate?
Well, this is the key question for Samsung going forward. What does this do to their reputation? The Note 7 had been reviewed as basically the best phone of 2016. It was seen as being a significant step forward for Samsung. And now to have this problem, specifically one that's not a software glitch potentially that impacted a program, but that made the phone itself unsafe. So moving forward, Samsung has a series of questions to answer. One, are they going to be able to take and identify what the actual cause of the flaw was with the battery? Two, will they be able to take and convince consumers that this is a problem that does not extend to other Samsung models? And three, will they be able to convince consumers going forward that they've resolved the issue and therefore all Samsung products going forward are safe? If they're unable to do that, they run the risk of consumers turning to other products, be they Apple, Chinese, or other low market designs from India as well.
Yes, indeed, Mr. Huang. You see a lot of competitors, of course, vis-a-vis the Samsung Note, the Apple, and even Chinese Xiaomi, and some of the others. The question is, how long can they recover? And how long can they be able to, Samsung answer the three questions just asked by Mr. Stangarone?
It's very hard to say how long they can come back. We have good news and also bad news. And the good news is, the smartphone usually, and the cycle for smartphone is relatively short. People tend to change their phones, and then every 2 years or maybe every 4 years. So people may easy to forget, and so the previous problem. On the other hand, that also says that people's loyalty to the brand is less than maybe compared to other products. So this is a double-edged sword for Samsung. And previously, we see some of the international and vendors in China, for example, the computer and notebook vendor, they had a similar problem in China, and then they lost, their brand name has been damaged significantly. They never ever recovered their market leading position and after the crisis. So it's very hard to predict right now.
But you also have other example, for example, Toyota. Recall their products was quite something, and the stock market not doing very well at all for a long time, but eventually it did recover. Mr. Stangarone, what does it take to recover? Better products, certainly, and what else?
I think not only do they have to take and demonstrate that they've resolved the issues with the battery, but they have to develop innovative and superior products to their competitors. Right now they're in a situation to where people will be looking at other options. And to bring those consumers back, they're going to have to convince them not only is that product safe, but that it's a product that they desperately want to have. Phones tend to be almost cultural items. This is one of the reasons why the iPhone has been successful. And so to take and get that, as we would say in the United States, almost cachet back is going to be the real challenge for Samsung. And to do that, they're going to have to take and continue to innovate.
Samsung Note 7 had problems for quite some time. 2 weeks after the problem was being exposed to the media, they recalled the product. But only 5 weeks later, they stopped producing that specific Samsung Note 7. Some suggest that the efficiency of that decision has been relatively slow regarding the scale of explosion in a way in terms of the news about the Samsung Note 7. Mr. Huang, what would you say?
I think the way that Samsung handled this crisis, I don't think it's a very good one. And at least it shows they didn't know the root cause of the problem. Originally they thought it was a battery problem. After replacing the battery, and then they got the problem popping up again. So this is really, in terms of crisis management, I don't think they have done a very fantastic job. And so this is also hurt their brand name quite a bit.
But you've seen, Mr. Stangarone, that manufacturers or the designers of products that have problems tend to believe in the lesser version of the possible problem that the product could have. And only always after some twists and turns, they accept that the eventual reality. Is Samsung another demonstration this time with Note 7 of that? And meanwhile, What does it say about Samsung, this specific company itself? After all, it's been one of those leading companies from South Korea about new technology and probably the future, some even consider some time ago. And is that contagious also in other South Korean companies? Many would wonder even.
Well, as you say, we do see this often. Companies take and they would like to take and draw out the time for a recall, review the product, perhaps even suggest that it's user error in some cases. Clearly in the case of the Samsung phones, that wasn't the case. But I think one of the challenges that Samsung faces here is that, when they entered into this recall, it wasn't done smoothly. They may have actually tried to go too quick, to where many companies actually maybe delay and try to put things off. We saw a situation to where they didn't coordinate with US regulatory authorities, they didn't coordinate with other regulatory authorities around the world. That led to confusion about how the recall was taking place. And so, in a sense, perhaps Samsung was too eager to take and try and fix the problem. And that may have led to further problems in terms of the recall phones. So I think in that sense, Samsung maybe should be faulted for going too quickly rather than too slowly. But in terms of the broader cultural issues we've seen, there are indications now that as part of its review process, Samsung is going to look into its procedures in both design and testing. We've seen indications that Samsung actually tested the battery internally rather than through external certification processes. I think we're likely to see these types of things change. But it does raise a question, broadly speaking, about the chaebol themselves, if because you do have the situations where they buy products from different companies within the broader family, if you might see these similar type of problems pop up.
Of course, Apple operates in a very different way compared to Samsung and some of the other smartphone producers, including Chinese ones. For example, they usually come up with products of their own, almost for all components, except some very special ones. And yet all the others are operating differently. This also is a demonstration, Mr. Huang, of how much you should trust your partners, your business partners, and what kind of credibilities you together could provide to the overall consumers. I think that's a big question mark as we go along this road.
I don't think the number of the component you used from third parties is really an issue. If you compare to Apple with Samsung, for example, almost all the components Apple use are from third party. And the chips and actually some of the Apple's CPU in the smartphones actually manufactured in Samsung factory.
All right.
And then compared to other smartphone manufacturers, Samsung used a lot their own and components from Samsung families. So I don't think that the third party is an issue. In the smartphone industry, the competition is really, really intense. And this is perhaps not similar like the automobile industry, as you mentioned before. Even before this crisis, we see Samsung's leadership position already being eroded significantly by the Chinese vendors. And because the Android phone, for example, it's very difficult to make a differentiation among all the vendors. So all the vendors has to fight very hard and then try to make some features unique. Like for example, like a dual camera, for example, you have to charge your battery very quickly. Some of the features when they first come up with, and it looks like pretty unique, and the next year they become standard features. As we can see, and the competition is really intense. So all the vendors try to fight for like a time to market.
That's right.
You maybe ship your phone before Apple does, for example. That's added the pressure, and also on the features and also on the price. So this is make them quite vulnerable and to ship out the product with a defect. However, and then the product defect is one thing, crisis is another one. I think the way they handled it and from product defect into a big crisis, there's a lot of things that they should learn.
Eventually, what would this mean? I mean, at this moment, Samsung, of course, has to scratch its head and trying to figure out what's going on and do enough to show to the outside world it pays attention and correct these mistakes and things like that. And that means time.
Yeah.
During this period of time, what would that mean for the other smartphone producers? What kind of competition are we likely to see from now on?
I'm pretty sure the others, including Apple, and are quite happy. And then they see this is the opportunity for them to gain the market share. Globally, Samsung's still the number one market share and the leader. And then it's opportunity and for Apple and from the top end and also the Chinese vendor from the lower end and to erode the Samsung's market share.
Well, Mr. Stangarone, what do you make of it?
Well, I think this is correct. Samsung actually has been trying to fend off both Apple and vendors in China, India, and other countries for the last couple of years. So they've had this challenge to where they've had Apple on the high end eating into their margins and companies like Xiaomi eating in on the low end. And so this creates an opportunity for all of them to gain greater market share. And the real challenge here too, though, is that we look at this even beyond volume. You have a situation to where many of the smartphone manufacturers, Apple gets the vast majority, potentially up to 90% of the profits from all the smartphones. Samsung tends to get what's left. And so the real question, I think, for Samsung, and the reason the Galaxy Note is such a difficult challenge for them is that this was a high-end phone. It was going to be a high-margin phone. It was the most expensive phone Samsung had out there up till now. And so they're going to really see it on that sort of profit side of their smartphones as well in terms of overall globally and internally.
Okay, Mr. Stangarone, I understand you're an expert on Korean economy. Before we go, we have 30 seconds left only for you. What do you think this story about Samsung mean for the other big family conglomerates coming from South Korea?
Well, I think it demonstrates some of the challenges we're seeing right now. You have the Hanjin bankruptcy going on. You have a need for to have structural reform, both in the shipbuilding industry, the steel industry. So I think it's reflective of the broader challenges some of the South Korean conglomerates are facing right now.